Recorded Books and RB Digital present Cult X by Fuminori Nakamura. Narrated by Brian Nishi. O Varuna, what has been my greatest transgression? Rigveda. She's alive. The bar's blue lights faintly illuminated Narazaki's face. Their malicious glow seemed to bleach the color from his body. Has his face always looked like that? Kobayashi wondered. He looked like he'd lost something he needed to go on living. Yet his gaze was terribly powerful and had a strange radiance. She's really alive? Narazaki's voice was rough. I wouldn't lie. And it's no mistake. Ryoko Tachibana is alive. The woman who had vanished from Narazaki's life, who had hinted at suicide and then disappeared. Kobayashi realized quite a bit of his whiskey was gone. His hand was moving his glass to his lips automatically. He was almost unsure he was in control of it. Okay, look. Kobayashi hesitated. I don't think you should get involved. Why? Well, to Kobayashi, Narazaki's relationship with Ryoko Tachibana had always seemed a bit off. When Kobayashi had happened to see her last month, he hadn't had the courage to speak to her, but maybe it was because of the work he did, he'd decided to tail her. She'd gone into an old apartment building. Without a doubt, it had been her. You looked into it for me, right? Tell me what you found. Well, Kobayashi could hear shouting coming from a table at the far side of the room. The voices gradually lost strength and vanished, as if dissolving into the darkness. A few weeks ago, when Kobayashi had told him he'd seen Ryoko Tachibana, Narazaki had looked surprised, but also seemed to have already known. Like it somehow made sense to him. Kobayashi had given Narazaki the address of the apartment building, but for some strange reason, Narazaki had insisted Kobayashi investigate instead. It was true, Kobayashi did work at a PI's office, but he hadn't even been there 6 months. So far, he'd mostly just assisted the other investigators and had never worked a case alone. He'd felt a case like this would be too much for him. But he'd taken the job, if reluctantly, and he had actually discovered quite a lot in a short time. There was something odd about that, he thought. How could someone like me, someone still training, find so much out so easily? Is there some big secret? Something that would hurt me? Not exactly. A peal of laughter from another distant table. In the dim light of the restaurant, Kobayashi could only make out the outlines of the people laughing. He caught himself drinking again. He was trying to get drunk. Why? Should I tell Narazaki what I'm worried about? Kobayashi wondered. He had all the material he'd collected about Ryoko Tachibana in his bag. She'd been born in Nagasaki Prefecture, had attended elementary high school there, and then moved to Tokyo to enroll in Rikkyo University. But she'd withdrawn, and that trail of information ended. She next surfaced at a meeting held at the facility of a certain small religious organization in Tokyo, the kind of organization people didn't hear many good things about. But eventually she'd vanished again. She reappeared last year, and that was when she met Narazaki. There were no traces of her life between the time she left that religious organization and when she met him. She just somehow appeared before Narazaki, then vanished again. This religious group also bothered Kobayashi. It was the sort of thing one just shouldn't get involved in. And now she had already moved out of the apartment he'd seen her enter. Kobayashi stared listlessly at the counter. The 3 bartenders looked like triplets. They moved slowly and emotionlessly. Kobayashi shook his head slightly. I understand you're puzzled, but in any case, she's not dead. That I confirmed. And given that, look, what's clear is that she left you. She probably had her reasons. I understand that's not enough to satisfy you, but she left you. Kobayashi's whole investigation of this woman had felt strange. As he traced her history, it was as if a single line had been prepared for him to follow. Like she was somewhere in the distance, beckoning him. Kobayashi took another sip of whiskey. She should have known he worked at an investigator's office. Had she shown herself to him that first time on purpose? But why? Why would she do that? Listen, Kobayashi turned to face Narazaki. Let me say this clearly. I've got a bad feeling about this. You shouldn't try to find her. There's no need for you to get dragged into whatever this is. Why? You have your life. My life? You could get hurt. That doesn't matter. Kobayashi would remember, for the rest of his life, Narazaki's next words. The life I lived. That life has no value at all. Kobayashi stared for a second at Narazaki's face. In the end, he handed him the envelope filled with everything he'd found about Ryoko Tachibana. There was a small commotion at the table next to them. Kobayashi sipped his whiskey. As he drank, he realized he was getting drunk so he would be able to give the envelope to Narazaki. He watched Narazaki open the envelope, wondering what his role was. If this were a novel, he probably wouldn't be anything more than a side character. Whatever happened to whom, it would have nothing to do with him. He'd just be the cog that happened to set things in motion. The other customers gradually headed home. Eventually, only Narazaki and Kobayashi were left in the dim bar. The blue lights illuminated only Narazaki. Though there was no longer any need for him to drink, Kobayashi ordered another whiskey. His life had no value. That's what Narazaki said. That may be true, Kobayashi thought. Even to Kobayashi, Narazaki's life did not seem like a fulfilled one. Certainly, his life was not something anyone would be jealous of, just like Kobayashi's. Part 1. 1. In front of Narazaki was a gate. It was an old, enormous wooden gate. There was something written on it, but the characters had faded, and Narazaki couldn't make them out. Should I go straight in? Narazaki was unsure. There's something strange about this place. But isn't it just a normal house? It seems more like a house than a church or temple. The gate cut through the frigid air and towered over Narazaki. It seemed like it was looking down on him, testing him, about to pass down some sort of judgment. Looking up at the gate, Narazaki was made aware of the smallness of his own body. He wasn't ready to go in, so he walked past. The building was surrounded by tall brick and clay walls, and Narazaki couldn't see inside. He recalled Kobayashi's report. Ryoko Tachibana had certainly belonged to this group. The founder was named Shotaro Matsuo, a man who called himself an amateur intellectual. The group seemed to be some sort of religious organization, but they didn't have a proper name. They weren't registered as a religion, and the whole concept of believing in, their faith, seemed foreign to them. They didn't worship a particular god. In fact, the group's focus seemed to be pondering the question, is there a god? What were they? Narazaki didn't understand. As he passed the gate, Narazaki thought to himself, I always do this. I always hesitate. It was as though he wanted to spend the rest of his life stuck, the days sinking away heavily. Though they were unhappy, he wanted to savor that unhappiness. The languor seemed to be his very flesh, and he could never leave it. But he had decided to stop living that way. He would follow the pull of the gravity he had begun to feel within himself. He would give himself up to whatever came. He didn't.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.